What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over some tips and pieces of advice you're going to want to keep in mind if you do want to get better at Fortnite. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, find it helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, comment down below how long you've been playing Fortnite, and if you guys would like to use my code in the shop when getting anything, it is EvolveJake, just like my channel name is, and it is underneath the webcam at all times. So I know there's a lot of players out there, just from reading comments and talking about this on stream, that have been playing the game for a long time but don't feel like they're actually improving. And I think a lot of that has to do with the battle royale genre and the mindset that people kind of have when it comes to like playing and trying to improve. I think one of the most important things you're going to need to accept if you do want to get better at the game is that you're probably going to need to take some steps backwards or like win less in the short term to actually get better. Like, fighting is an essential skill if you do want to improve and actually like consistently win games and consistently be like in the running to win your games. You probably need to get better at fighting, and the only way you're going to get better at fighting, I think, is just by getting into more fights and kind of forcing that pace. I think a lot of players struggle to improve because battle royales are just naturally set up in a way where you don't get in very many fights. And then also a lot of players, when they initially start playing the game, they're chasing the win. That's kind of like the big thing in a battle royale, especially if you're a new player. You want to get your first win, you want to get your first few wins, and that like feeling of winning feels good regardless of how many kills you get, right? But I think if you fall into that trap early on, your playstyle can kind of warp around just winning entirely and then become very passive. And you might win in the short term more just by camping than you would have, if you were forcing in fights and playing a little bit more risky. But in the long term, the player who gets in more fights and gets experience fighting and gets comfortable fighting, I think is going to win out more in the long run than the person who's just like, playing very passive. So like in the short term, hiding and playing passive can get you wins. But I think in the long term, if you actually want to get better and want to win consistently, you need to get in more fights. And I've seen players kind of critique the idea of fighting enemy players because they view Fortnite as a survival game where the goal is just to be the final player at surviving and win. And that is true. That's how you win in a battle royale. But if you look at, like, the way I look at it is if you're a weak fighter who's playing very passive, you can definitely win some games in the short term, as I was saying, or win occasionally. But it's almost going to be up to the other players if you are able to win. You're never just going to like take that win and force that win, you know what I mean? If it comes down to a 1v1 and you get decent timing versus a player who, also isn't very great, then you can probably win that fight. But if the final player is decent or like a very good player and like confident at fighting, just getting timing on them often won't be enough for you to win the fight. And it's kind of been my experience for most of Fortnite that it's pretty rare the player who gets second is actually the second best player in the lobby. Oftentimes when I play a match and win, it's like you can look at a point in the game, like a mid-match fight, and it's like, yeah, it would have been either me or this guy who won this game. This guy was a good fighter. And I feel like most games kind of have that moment or have a few of those moments, but it's very rare that the last fight is actually the hardest fight. And even when making spectating videos, it's pretty rare that the final player puts up much of a fight at all. It's usually just somebody that's hiding or wasting time, or even an AI in a lot of cases. So I think just improving at fighting is the most important thing if you do want to get better at the game and want to consistently win. And I feel like we all kind of know that. Even those players who are playing more passive, I feel like deep down kind of know that like they're not good enough to win any other way, and that's why they're kind of forcing that. I think another reason why it can be very difficult for players to kind of improve and build this fighting skill is because from a timing perspective, battle royales are not efficient at all for practice. Like, you could play out a match that's close to 20 minutes long and get in less than 10 fights over the course of that game. Like, a 10 kill win is a lot to, a lot of players. And even then that might be like one kill every like 2 or 3 minutes, kind of depending on how things break down. And also, not only do you get in very few fights over the course of the game, the penalty for losing a fight is quite high because you need to just completely restart everything, wait for a new match, loot up, and then find players again. So like, time efficiency wise, battle royales are not very good, and the penalty for losing a fight is also very high, and that just adds more time in your play session that's like not useful in any way. With getting in more fights, you'll surely lose more in the short term, as I was talking about, but over time you'll get better at fighting, and that kind of breaks down into several things. Like there's the muscle memory of like aiming and movement that's really important in fighting, but also just getting comfortable making decisions quickly is essential in any PvP game I've ever played, just any game in general I've ever played. Most games you can kind of look at somebody and just immediately tell if they're good or bad at the game. And I think one of the reasons why is just because of how decisive and comfortable they are making decisions. A lot of players who aren't as good are often second guessing everything they do, and that makes it hard to do anything. Like a bad decision you commit to is better than doing nothing most of the time. A lot of players like are very nervous or scared in fights, and that makes it very hard to come to a decision quickly and just like do it in the heat of the moment. And that matters a lot in this game because fights are often decided in less than a second, especially in close range. If you hesitate at all and your opponent makes a play on you, that might just be GG. So I think getting in more fights and getting that repetition will help you get better, but it'll also help you build confidence in fights, and also just see that it's really not the end of the world if you do lose. Like what happens if you lose a fight? You go back to the lobby and then you start again. It's not that big of a deal one way or the other. So just getting in more fights, I think, kind of reduces that panic that a lot of people has. And then also just, I think getting in more fights will get better at fighting, and then that will also go hand in hand with like kind of getting rid of that nervousness or getting rid of that panic. A lot of players also have a lot of kind of nervousness endgame, and when you compound that with like nervousness in fighting, I think that is a rough scenario for the player we talked about at the start of the video who's just like hiding all game trying to win. If you never get in fights and you never kind of get over that panic, and then also you're just naturally panicking in the end game, I think it's going to be even harder for you to win, especially versus somebody who's not nervous and not scared because they're used to fighting, they're used to being in endgame, and they're actually confident in their own abilities and know that they, can win that match. So I think building skill and building familiarity with fighting is essential, but battle royales just naturally are not very good game modes for this. You can just play more aggressive in BR and try to get in more fights, and that'll work. But also the other game modes we have, I think, are just much better from a time efficiency perspective for improving at fighting. So reload and creative maps that allow you to fight other players, I think, are a much better avenue to practice fighting. And now would be a pretty good time for you to play reload if you are somewhat burnt out on BR, because we have about a week left on this map and with this loot pool anyway. So I think a lot of people are kind of tired of it, and reload can be, somewhat of a breath of fresh air. And then the same is true with creative. If you're not having a good time playing BR anyways, creative is going to be much better practice, and you're going to get in much more fights in a short time span with much less downtime between fights. I do have a video I made a bit ago about like which game modes I think are best for improving, and I'll try to have that linked down in the description below if I remember. But I think playing these other game modes is also something that can help you get better a lot. Fortnite is a game that is naturally always changing, and so two other things that you're going to want to keep in mind if you do want to be good at this game is that you're going to need to adapt to different items and different playstyles from time to time, whether that be mobility items changing, the loot pool changing, the meta changing. We've seen it a lot in this season, how much the loot pool has changed. But even over the course of Chapter 6, we have had red dot ARs kind of be the meta for quite some time in Zero Build. But when it came to Season 3, the super season, and we went back to third-person bloom ARs, a lot of people struggled. And when you're kind of put in that scenario, you can either choose to embrace it and try to get better with those weapons, or complain about it. And I feel like a lot of players were slower to adapt to that different meta because they were upset about it. And there's countless times in Fortnite where the meta has changed. This season we have a double pump meta for the first time in quite a while, and the players who embrace that and adapt to that and get used to using that have had an advantage over the people that didn't. So just having an open mind when it comes to, adapting to new things, whether that be a different loot pool, map changes, weapons getting buffed or nerfed. Fortnite is a game that's always changing, and so you need to be open to changing with it. And then Fortnite is also a game that has had a lot of cheese items or like really OP things. The Swarm Strike rocket launcher could be an example of that this season. Some of the melee weapons we've had throughout Chapter 6, the spaceships in the Star Wars season. If those items are like a crutch for you and the only thing you use to win fights and the only way that you can win fights, you might again succeed a little bit more in the short term abusing that, but when it goes, you're right back to square one. And the players who improve with like kind of the more regular style weapons, I think often do succeed more in the long run. So it's kind of might be confusing what I just said, because I was saying you need to adapt to different metas, but also not rely too much on the cheesy things. But I feel like deep down as players, we all kind of know what that means. And there's the more like traditional AR shotgun kind of weapons that are always good in Fortnite. And then there's like the season OP thing. And if you do want to consistently be good at every Fortnite season, I think just improving with a wide variety of weapons is important, and not just focusing on kind of the cheesy things. And this is just true for battle royales in general, because when you land, who knows what you're going to get. So being familiar with like kind of everything in the loot pool, or most of the things in the loot pool, I think helps a lot. And a lot of weapons kind of tend to play similar. Like the third person ARs, they have different fire rates, different damages, different bloom patterns. But like once you learn how to use that, you got it. The pump shotguns, they all kind of feel a bit different. But if you know how to play with a pump shotgun, you know how to play with a pump shotgun. Red dot AR, same thing. And so once you improve with these different style weapons, you can kind of take that into future seasons easily. And then the final thing I want to talk about is just going to be replay mode. I talked before about how it's like important to get in a lot of fights if you do want to get better. And replay mode can be something that's kind of helpful for you improving your fighting skill. I think a lot of players kind of overanalyze things way too much, especially for like public matches. It's not that deep. But I think one thing that can really help you for replay mode is watching your fights back from the enemy's perspective and see what it looks like to fight you. Because I think a lot of times when people are in a fight, they might be making obvious mistakes, or they might be like standing still and not doing anything, but they don't really realize that in the moment because they're so focused on the fight, right? But if you watch back the fight from the enemy's perspective and see what you look like, I think a lot of your kind of mistakes might be a little bit more obvious to you. One thing you do need to keep in mind with replay mode though, is it is kind of buggy. I don't really know how the internet or computers really work, but from my understanding, it's like a local recording of something that happened server side. So it's a little bit not accurate in terms of what actually happened. So it might look like you got shot around a corner. It might look like you got shot when the enemy's reticle wasn't on you. That's just replay mode being buggy. But just like the big picture things of what your movement looked like in a fight, or what you were doing in a fight, or like kind of how much of your character you were exposing to the enemy player, things like that should be accurate. But you don't want to fall into that habit of just like arguing with replay mode about how their reticle wasn't on you, because in reality it was. It just looks buggy in replay mode. But that is going to be it for this video. As always, if you guys did find this to be helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, comment down below when you started playing Fortnite, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.